Africa has never won the World Cup, and that's strange when you consider how much football talent the continent has produced over the years. African players have won the Champions League, dominated Europe's biggest leagues, and become legends of the game. Yet when it comes to football's biggest prize, no African nation has ever lifted the trophy. And what makes it even more interesting is how close some of them have come. So the real question isn't whether Africa has talent. The question is why that talent has never been enough to win the World Cup. To understand this, you have to go back to the early World Cups. For a long time, African teams were not fully part of the system. Qualification spots were limited, and in some eras, access to the tournament was extremely restricted compared to Europe and South America. That meant while other nations were building experience at the highest level, many African teams were still trying to find consistent opportunities to compete. And in football, that matters more than people think, because talent alone doesn't build World Cup winners. Experience, structure, and repeated exposure to elite competition do. So Africa wasn't starting with less talent, it was starting with less time in the system. That begins to change in 1990. Cameroon arrive at the World Cup with low expectations, but they quickly changed the story of the tournament. They beat defending champions Argentina, one of the biggest shocks in World Cup history, and suddenly the football world starts paying attention. This wasn't a lucky result. It was a signal that African teams could compete at the highest level. Cameroon eventually reached the quarterfinals, becoming the first African nation to go that far. From that moment, African football was no longer just participating in the World Cup. It was influencing it. After Cameroon, expectations change, but so does pressure. In 2002, Senegal repeat the shock by defeating France in the opening match and going deep into the tournament. African teams are now seen as dangerous opponents, not underdogs. Then comes 2010. Ghana reach a point no African team had reached before at that time, the quarterfinals. In their match against Uruguay, they are seconds away from a historic semifinal. A penalty arrives at the very end of extra time. If it goes in, Africa reaches a semifinal for the first time ever. It doesn't, and Ghana are eliminated. It wasn't just a loss, it was a reminder of how thin the margins are at this level. In knockout football, games are often decided by single moments rather than overall dominance, and that is where tournaments are won and lost. So why hasn't Africa won the World Cup yet? The simple answer people often give is talent, but that's not accurate. Africa has produced world-class players in every generation, many of whom succeed at the highest levels in Europe. The difference is not individual quality, it is structure. Winning a World Cup requires more than standout players. It requires depth across the entire squad, tactical consistency, and long-term systems that prepare teams for 7 high-pressure matches in a row. European and South American teams often benefit from stronger football systems, more consistent development structures, and deeper tournament experience at youth and senior levels. In contrast, many African teams have historically had less stability in preparation and fewer opportunities to build long-term systems that peak exactly at the right moment. At this level, small differences become massive. One mistake, one injury, one moment of hesitation can decide everything. Then comes 2022. Morocco changed the entire conversation. They don't just perform well, they eliminate some of the strongest teams in the world and reach the semifinals, becoming the first African nation in history to do so. And this time, it doesn't feel like a surprise. It feels like progress finally reaching its peak. For the first time, the question around African football changes. It is no longer about whether Africa can compete. It is about when Africa will finally win. Africa has never won the World Cup, but the gap is no longer what it used to be. Every generation has come closer than the last. And if that trend continues, the story may not be about whether Africa will win the World Cup. It may be about which country becomes the first to change football history forever.